now in the Gulf of Mexico. So let's go ahead and get started with the briefing this afternoon. Here are sort of the key points. We do have a flash flood watch that's been issued for tonight and Thursday for coastal areas that have already had a great deal of rain, especially over the last 2 days. Additional rainfall is forecast, and this could lead to additional flash flooding. There still is a chance a tropical depression or weak tropical storm could develop over the southern Gulf over the next day and a half or so. Intensification to a hurricane is not expected, so we are thinking, as we hinted at yesterday, that this will likely stay a weaker storm. That disturbance, depression, or storm is forecast to track toward the west-northwest, reaching the lower to mid-Texas coast on Friday. Nonetheless, we do have quite a bit of rain just offshore. We have a boundary there, and this is helping focus periods of rain, occasionally heavy. Up till now, it's been concentrated right at the coast, and with the additional rainfall expected off and on through Saturday, we could be looking at some flash flooding in that coastal area. And I'll show you the flash flood watch where we're most concerned about in a moment. With this weaker storm scenario and track well south of the area, the way it looks now, we would expect only minor rises in tides and seas and little effect on winds. Of course, we still need to watch it. It is over some very warm waters, so we will update if we need to, if it does sort of unexpectedly intensify more than we currently think. This slide shows some radar estimates of rainfall over the last couple of days. On the lower left, you can see the rainfall over the last 24 hours, and those yellows indicate estimates in the 2 to 3 inch range. We have some darker browns there indicating 4 to 5 inches. So quite a bit of rain fell overnight last night and then the night before as well. If you total last night and the night before, you get the image on the right, and you can see that rain sort of fell over the same areas. Led to quite a bit of flooding of streets, some road closures. Yesterday, certainly Texas City took the brunt, and today areas like League City and some others had quite a bit of high water. But 2-day totals are 10 to 15 inches in some areas near the coast. Whereas you go just a little bit inland, for example, the city of Houston on Northwest, not as much rain, not nearly as much. So what are we expecting going forward? We do, as I said, have a flash flood watch for the areas shown in the lower right there, those counties highlighted in green. I do want to point out that this year we've actually subdivided some of the counties. So you can see Southern Liberty and Southeast Harris County are highlighted, whereas the rest of the county is not. So we are able to add a little more detail than we have in years past. Those are, of course, the areas that we just saw had the most rain over the last 48 hours. And we're in a similar pattern where new storms develop, they move ashore, and give us periods of heavy rain, quite often in the late night and morning, but it could really be other times as well. And on the left-hand side, the area in yellow has the greatest chance, again, of getting flash flood level rains. What about areas outside the flash flood watch? We still could be looking at perhaps some street flooding or poor drainage flooding underneath the heaviest downpours. So could be some minor flooding, we think, inland as well. Rainfall estimates over the duration of the event, say from now through the weekend. We're looking at totals generally in the 2 to 4 inch range on average near the coast, perhaps 1 to 2, 1 to 3 inland, but local amounts up to 8 inches are possible in heavier bands, especially near the coast. and again, those are areas that have already had a lot of rain, so they're more vulnerable to new flooding. When does this pattern finally change a little bit? As we get into later Saturday and Sunday, we still have some isolated storms potentially, but more of the widespread coverage appears to be shifting a little bit to the west. Turning our attention now to that tropical disturbance in the Gulf. You can see on the left-hand side the red X in the Gulf. That's the 2 o'clock position of the sort of the center of the disturbance. And the red hatched area in the Gulf indicates where that disturbance could become a depression over the next day or two. And as it continues to track toward the northwest, it should reach the lower to mid-Texas coast sometime on Friday. More likely than not, the storm will stay fairly weak. Either a disturbance or a depression could possibly strengthen into a tropical storm. So we still need to monitor for the next few days for intensification, but at this point it seems like it should remain relatively weak. Also on that map on the left-hand side, note Tropical Storm Isaac approaching the Lesser Antilles and moving west toward the Caribbean. That's a storm we'll also have to watch over the next couple of weeks. Over the next 7 days, it's forecast to track into the Caribbean Sea and position perhaps into the Western Caribbean by this time next week. From there, a lot of uncertainty on where it goes, how intense it is. So again, that's a storm we'll also have to watch. Hurricane Center has kept the chance of development right at about 70%. So about a 7 in 10 chance it will become at least a depression. About a 3 in 10 chance it remains more of a wave. Either way, as we've said all week, it will provide some enhancement in our rainfall Thursday into Saturday. Seas and tides, we are expecting some elevated seas and tides beginning this evening. The map on the right, the chart on the right, the upper graph is a forecast water level for the Galveston Bay entrance area, and the model is showing about somewhere between 3 and 3.5 feet above mean lower low water around times of high tide. What does that mean? That's simply a reference from which we can gauge impacts. So usually at water levels of 3 to 3.5, only the most vulnerable areas are impacted. Thinking out, for example, on Bolivar toward High Island, maybe some of the some impacts on the beaches themselves. So relatively minor issues at the coast as far as elevated tides, about 1 foot to 1.5 foot above normal. So just to recap, new information here, we do have a flash flood watch issued for tonight. Actually starts at midnight and then runs through the day Thursday for those coastal sections that have already experienced heavy rainfall, and more is expected. Still could get a tropical depression or tropical storm over the southern Gulf. We'll have to monitor as usual, but right at this point we don't expect intensification into a hurricane. And then that system will track toward the northwest, reaching the lower to mid-Texas coast Friday. We do expect some enhanced rainfall from that feature. Of course, we've had rain even without that feature the last few days, and that wet pattern is expected to continue into at least Saturday. And with the weaker storm scenario we've described and the track fairly far south, other than the increased rainfall potential, impacts on other areas such as tides and winds should really be minimal from that system. So that ends the briefing.